when we're talking about flesh, obviously there's a whole gamut to pull from. And I'll use myself to start, and really lighting will determine how to mix a flesh tone. But according to color theory, basically your red, yellow, and blue will enable you to mix really any flesh tone at all. So if we're starting with somebody like me, I'm fairly pale, I'll start with yellow ochre and one of my reds and see what that looks like. And I'll hold it up and match it, and I feel pretty good about that. However, I'm in a dark space and I have a dark shadow. And so I'm a bit of an orange tone person, and so I'm actually going to use my green, my complement, in order to deepen and find that shadow. So if I pick up a little bit of that green, it'll neutralize it and I'll find a little bit more of that medium tone. However, additionally, you will find purples in flesh, in dark and light flesh. So if I mix in alizarin crimson and a little bit of my ultramarine, and I take that and put that on my base flesh tone, it'll create a sort of more, dark version of that red, but adding a little bit more blue, neutralizing it, we'll find the shadow part of my structure there. Now, for maybe a darker tone, I might start with a clean brush. I might start without white and say, let's try a yellow ochre, and let's try my deeper version of red, so my alizarin crimson. And then we'll see what that green does. What does that green do? Well, that creates something that is more of like a caramel brown, right? Now, far easier to do is to take a little bit of your brown and see what happens. So if I take my burnt sienna and I have a touch of white in it, I can mix a really neutral flesh tone, really neutral. I can deepen it with a little bit of a green to find a shadow, or I can deepen it with a little bit of a purple. So I've got my burnt sienna, and then I'm mixing a purple, and I drop that into my burnt sienna, and that will find a really deep shadow, and that's a very warm shadow. And I can change the temperature of that shadow depending on how much blue I put into that purple, right? If I get really dark, so maybe the crevasse of an eye or the deep dark shadow of a neck, behind the neck as the hair follows behind the neck, I might take my burnt umber and a little bit of that green in order to find that real deep dark, okay? If I get really deep in there, I might have my burnt umber and a little bit of that blue. However, the more blue you put in flesh, the deader it's going to look. So I'd avoid that. Err on the side of warmth there, okay? So a simple solution is to simply use one of your browns. However, I never actually rely on that. I always start typically with the actual value, and it might include white and it might not. And then one of my reds and one of my yellows. And then I assess from there. And that's a very orange complexion. The other thing that you might deal with is olive complexion. And how you mix an olive is actually with yellow ochre, oopsie, yellow ochre and a touch of your black. Mix a little bit of white in it, see what happens. And you've got an olive flesh tone that may require a little bit of warmth. Okay. So you really are playing with neutral browns, and you're playing with the temperature of those browns. Now, if I'm looking at the image that I've got here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down in terms of 3 values, but I'm going to start with my darks. And I've got pretty much a sort of blue, purple, black hair that I'm just going to mass in really quickly that is going to define the edges of my subject. And I'll just sort of put that on very quickly. And I'm not going to think about too much. hard for me to do this and talk. And I do have black in this hair, so I will allow you to use it if it's there. But the thing is the whole head of hair is not black. We've got a deep, 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 dark brown black. And in the light, what happens is that brown black will oftentimes, and I'm segmenting it out, okay? But that brown black will sometimes turn purple. Okay? And that purple can easily be mixed. I'll use a touch of my Prussian, or my, what do you call it? Phthalo blue. Touch of white. And a touch of my alizarin crimson. We'll see what happens. And I might work that in. Obviously, you need a lot more paint. And I'm massing this in very quickly as just a simple shape, okay? And this is just gonna act as the understructure of the hair that's gonna go on top of it, okay? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. I have, I'm gonna deal with the t-shirt real quick. I do have a pretty deep dark black shadow. However, I don't always wanna rely on that. But what I will do is I'm gonna mask that shadow in really quickly. And I do want a separation between the hair and the shadow itself. So I'll throw that blue gray onto this very quickly. Got a little bit of yellow on there. Didn't want that. Okay, all right, and then we'll start with flesh. And the first thing that I do is I deal with the deep darks first. I don't want to lose the eyes, nose, and mouth, right? And I've got a fairly small brush here, and I want you to kind of think about a couple of things. The openings of the face are not black. The openings of the face are deep, dark red. And so what I'm gonna do is using my burnt umber, and that's actually burnt sienna. I wish I had burnt umber. Does anyone have burnt umber? I'll take some of my burnt sienna and a little bit of my alizarin crimson, and that will act as my deepest dark. And I will find the shape of the opening of my mouth, the opening of my nostrils, and what I'll do is I'll kind of reiterate the shape of the shadow structures going down the face. So these are basically just the planes. Great, fabulous. I rely a lot on burnt umber. It doesn't matter the flesh tone, but I really, really do, because it's a deep, warm tone that will enable me to not muddy up my colors. Yeah, that's burnt umber. Alizarin crimson. So a couple things I want to illustrate is the whites of the eyes are never white, ever. They're actually a blue-gray if they even bother. And the shadow structure will enable you to kind of find a likeness. So this shadow over here is really quite important. I will throw it in there. All right. Now, while these shadows are not actually that color, what I've done is I've mapped it out, okay? I've mapped out where my brows are gonna go, even though the brows are more of a cool. And then I'm going to start thinking about the temperature of the 3 values that I have. 1, 2, 3. Okay? I have all that going on. And it's easier for me to change that while I've established this, but I don't want to lose this. Okay? So what I'll do is I'll mix a mass of my medium tone. And I am dealing with yellow ochre, bit of white, and a touch of my medium red, my cad red. I'm gonna hold it up and say I feel pretty good about that. And then I'm gonna slam it down. And what I'm establishing here is just a simple structure to follow, to build on. I'm not going to deal with the lips just yet. And this color will change, and I'll change it wet and wet for the most part. That same color over here. That's my medium color. And I got a little bit of a reflective tone here that I want to remind myself with. Then what I'll do is I'll mix my dark. And I see a little bit of a purple in that dark. So I'm going to mix a purple using my ultramarine, my alizarin crimson, hold it up, and I will neutralize it a little bit with my yellow ochre. And I'll throw it down. It's too dark. Reestablish that purple. I don't see that purple all the way, so you kind of have to pay attention to what's happening. And there's a famous painting done by Matisse called Girl with a Green Stripe. And it's an interesting painting because it really does like punctuate why we turn up color. Because that purple is not something you would normally see and assess and say, oh, that's the color I'm going with. But what I can do is I can go back and reestablish the warmth that I might be missing. So I go and I deal with my lights, and I'm actually out of yellow ochre. Will someone grab me a little bit more yellow ochre? More of a warm tone here, and I'll establish that. And once I've got all those down, what I can do is I can start to mix and throw in some detail. You see I've got a bit of a dirty brush here, bad habit, don't get into it. But what I will have is a framework, right? You can actually stop that, we'll make it 2 parts. Which brings me really quickly to the mouth. And her mouth is more of a purple red, a cooler red than a light pink. And so what I'll do, and you'll notice that the top lip is generally darker than the lower lip, just with the way the planes of the face turn. So I'll establish that tone. I'll slam it on there, and then I'll adjust it from there. I may have to deepen it, I may have to darken it, etc. I made our eyes a little too far apart, but we'll fix it. I'm noticing a little purple going on here, so I am gonna turn up the coolness on it, because there are 3 tones of value on this mouth. And she has this little line here, which is fun to paint. And then the mouth gets a little deeper and darker towards the edge. And then I will model, and I will make sure that I've covered the entirety of my surface. And you're gonna notice that the mouth actually has a lot more around it than you envision. I usually use a clean brush for this. All right. And what I'll do is, with a smaller brush, or another brush, I'll mix that gray of the eye, and I don't use black. I use a little bit of blue, and I use a little bit of that burnt umber. And you're gonna see, you have to ask yourself if it's cool or if it's warm, and I've got more of a cool than anything. So I'm gonna slam that down, not think about the detail there yet, because it is oil paint and I can move it. And then I've got a structure to deal with, all right? So once I have a structure to deal with, I might think about softening my edges, blending some things. I've got a lot to deal with, which would be my planes and softening my planes. So with a relatively clean brush, I can soften on my planes, I can move things, change them, make them a little bit larger or smaller, depending on what the likeness might require. I can sharpen them if they need to be sharpened. But I'm covering the total image while I do this. And that's my first pass. Bless you. Okay. Does anybody have a smaller brush than this? This is unsatisfactory brush. Thank you so much.
Very clean.
That's all right.
Not too small.
That's great. And here's the point at which I'll allow myself to get in with some detail. And I use a smaller brush and I work my way down. And I use that sort of frame of logic that I need to have any crevices or concavities need to be warm. So if I use my alizarin crimson and my burnt umber, I can reestablish where those eyes are. And I actually am probably going to go cooler on that. And I can deepen my shadows, enabling a little bit more of a gain in likeness. And she's got this great shadow here because of the glasses that I will paint at the end. Okay. And she's got a bit of a smirk, which I will indicate. And you see I'm sort of shorthanding the contrast there. I can cool it off if I need to. And there are some areas where I do need to kind of cool it off with more of a purple, like in the eyes. And I do see a visible lid, which I'll set into the value I've already established. Keep my finger in the paint. I'm not going to worry so much about the color of her eyes yet. That'll come in like the third pass, right? I've given her cross eyes. Yes, I have. You're welcome. Okay. And then I've got a little bit of brow to deal with. And brows are oftentimes painted in a way that is like a caterpillar. They are not caterpillars crawling across your face, y'all. They are soft. And they have a whole value structure within them that needs to be observed. And then I'll start to, there's a real deep shadow there. Real deep shadow there. And it'll start to come together as I start making these refinements. I can shape the face at this point because it's not quite her yet. Right? It's somebody else. But we're getting there. I know it's a long demo, sorry. And I might, on occasion, use a little bit of black in the lid. She's got a little bit more warmth in her nose than I allowed her to. So I'm going to bring back a nostril. And then I've got some fun stuff. I've got some shadows from her hair, which I'm going to use the same frame of logic that I used with the shadow structure up here, right? And I might deepen a shadow here and there, like where her smile line is, right? But I feel okay about that. Whatever, we can move on. At this point, I can start thinking about highlights. And I can say, oh, there's some really great, wonderful things, but highlights are not generally just white, okay? They have a temperature to them. I could think about these highlights as sort of a blue highlight, but really I think that they're ever so slightly yellow, ever so slightly. And these are things that I'm gonna look for in, say, the lid, above the eye itself. I might see them on the forehead running down. I might see a wonderful highlight on that lip, right? And I'll make that a little bit more pink. As it goes over. This gets a little lighter. See this great highlight running down the cheek. So this is the time at which you can kind of just reestablish those planes if they got lost. And all these little changes will give you more of a likeness that honor, your subject. You'll also see some highlights, maybe some brilliant blue highlights, which if ever there were a time to use your phthalo, it's a little bit of phthalo and your white, maybe possibly in the eye, but I don't really see any in the eye, but if I did, it'd be over here, right? Maybe, but I actually don't see any over there. So we're just gonna go back to brown. Don't see any. So at this point, I can do things like, you know, hair details. I feel fine about that right now. And how I'm gonna deal with these glasses, the problem of the glasses, those are darn near white yellow, right? And I need a little bit of my medium in order to make it a little less viscous. And I'm just gonna be bold about it because life is short. And I'll try to make the exact same line across. And I'm not gonna get too fussy because life is short, like I said. And I'll just sort of suggest it. Although they are very bright in that white. And you'll probably want to use a smaller brush than I'm using. But whatever. And that is how you make a portrait. Obviously I can get a little bit more picky, but that's essentially it. Questions?
Stop the video.
You can stop.